Hey everyone, welcome back to Code with Ro. In today's tutorial, we're diving into Unreal Engine 5 to learn how to set up input actions. This will help you handle user input in a more flexible and modular way. So let's get started. So first let's open up Unreal Engine 5. So I have this third person starter template that I created and I just called it input action tutorial. And now what I'm going to want to do is in our third person folder, we have a folder called input. And if we click on this IMC default, this stands for input mapping context, which is going to define where all our controls are and our actions. So for example, we included an action called jump, and it's the spacebar, the game face button bottom, and touch one for mobile users, and so on. And then we have IA move, which is input action move. And pretty much this is just assigning what our character does and what keys we need in order to use them. So I'll go back to my third person map and click on the actions. And this is where we'll be compiling our actions. This is where we'll be creating our actions. So we have input action jump. And if we double click to open this up, all it is a digital bool, which has two triggers, pressed and released, which is pretty much just going to tell us that it's basically a true or false function. And the only determination of this actually happening or functioning is pressed or released. So I'll go back to my third person map, right click, I'm going to highlight over input and create a new input action. And I'm going to call this something like IA underscore interact. And what I want to do is actually try to use this so that we can interact with this door that I imported using KKit's assets. So if you don't know who KKit is, this artist creates these really cool low poly looking dungeon maps. And I'll leave that in the link below if you're interested in downloading these. These are free and they do look really nice. They're really cute and yeah, very stylized. So now let's figure out how to actually interact with our door. So we created our IA jump or our IA underscore interact. And now let's add this to the IMC default, our input mapping context. So all we're going to need to do in order to add it as a mapping is click on this plus button to add another mapping action. And now we'll add that IA interact just like that. And now we're going to open this up and we can select a keybind by either just looking for it here. But since I like to use keyboard and mouse, you can just click on this keyboard and type in whatever you want on your actual keyboard in order to set the value. So if I click this and you see this color turn yellow, that means it's ready to take an input from your keyboard or mouse. So I'm going to click E on my keyboard, and instead of looking through all these buttons to go find it and so on, I can just type in that E and it pops up here. And I'll go back to my third person map, and I would just want to double click on this IA interact, make sure the value type is digital bool, and this looks fine to me. So now let's go over to our third person character. So over here in the world settings, if you don't see that, you can click on Windows on the upper left and make sure world settings has a check mark next to it so you'll see it in your details and world partition panel and so on. And don't worry if you don't see world partition. I'll expand this selected game mode, and next to default pawn class, we'll see BP underscore third person character, and I'll click on this magnifying glass to find this asset in the content browser, and I'll just double click to open that up. And now you'll see that in our event graph, by clicking event graph up here, you'll already see that there is already a good starting point for us to see how it works. So for example, on begin play, we're casting to our player controller, and it pretty much assigns our input mapping context that we saw earlier, which defines our controller and where we set our IA underscore interact. And underneath, you'll see it say IA look, IA move, and have some blueprints to define the movement, and IA jump. And that's exactly what we have in our IMC default that's assigned. So we have the look, move, and jump that we just saw in our BP third person character. And now that we've added this IA underscore interact, I can look for it as a blueprint. So I can do IA interact, and I can do something like when triggered, I want to print a string, and I'll call this something like interacted with door. It's not really going to do anything, but it will just print the string, and we just want to check that it works. So now I'll go back to my third person map and hit Alt P in order to play in full screen. And now when I hit E, you'll see on the top left, it's going to spam it a bunch of times because we're using the triggered instead of the pressed. So now I'll go back and I want to try to interact with this door. So first what we need to do is create an interaction system. So in my content browser, I am just going to right click, go to blueprint, and then blueprint interface. And I want to call this something like BPI underscore interact. And I will double click to open this up. I'll call this function interactable. And now I'll just hit compile and save. And now I want to create another blueprint for the door. So I'll right click, create a blueprint class, and select actor. And this is going to be called BP underscore door. And I'll just make sure I get the name of this door. So I will I'll just hit F2 to save the name and copy paste it. And now when I go to BP door, I'm going to click add a static mesh in the components on the left, and I'm just going to call this door. And nothing will actually pop in yet because we have to set it on the right where it says static mesh. And I'm just going to look for that door, and you'll see that it pops up right here. Now there is a small issue with this model that I want to fix up. It's that I want to open the door by just rotating it, but this is actually just twisting it and not actually opening up like a door would, where basically the very end would just stay, where the very end or the side would just stay, and you would just kind of see the whole thing move in and out, where one point is still standing, instead of the whole thing just twisting. So I just want to change the pivot point of this mesh. So I'm going to go back to my third person map, drag this BP door out, and we'll see that if I want to twist or open the door, it would just twist. So now from here, I'm just going to click on this selection mode and change to modeling. And now I'll select X form. And then what you want to do is click edit pivot. And now you'll see the pivot point pop up right here. And you can click on these little branches coming out of this cube in order to drag it. So I just want to drag it to the left on the very corner, and now I'll hit accept. And now after I hit accept, I'll go back to my blueprint and you'll see that it has moved. So now the door will actually open the way I want it to. So that fixes one problem, but we still need to add that interact. So in my event graph, or actually in my class settings, I need to add that BPI interact. So when we hit class settings, on the right side under details, we're going to see implemented interfaces, and we want to implement that BPI interact. And as soon as you add it on the left side under graphs or under my blueprints, you'll see in interface tab, and when you open it up, you'll see interactable. So I'll just double click to open this up, and basically this will function when we try to interact with this door. All right. So now in my third person character, I'm just gonna get rid of this print string, or actually I'll just leave it in. And then I wanna do a for each loop with a break, and I'll drag this array out and get overlapping actors. And for the class, I'm just gonna look for that BP door in this case, just as an example. And I'm gonna extend the execution pin of the loop body out and look for a branch node. And then I wanna call the interact function, which is from our BPI interact class. And for the array element, I just want to connect this to the target of the interactable. And at the end of this interact, I want to connect it to the break. And now back in my BP door, I added this event interactable, I got rid of the print string, and now I just want to add a box collision, which will help determine our overlapping event that we call in our third person character. So we have this overlapping actor of our BP door, just like that. And now I'm just going to make sure that this box size is fairly big to detect our character. And then I'll go back to the event graph, and after event interactable, I'm going to call a timeline. So I'm going to add this timeline and call this door opening, and I'll double click to go into it. And what I want to do is just set the length to something like 1 and add a float track. And then I'll hit shift left click and set the time to 0 and the value to 0 for our starting point. And in order to determine our endpoint, we're going to go back to the viewport and see which way we want it to go. So I can just select door and rotate it against the Z axis to -90 because I want it to open outward so my player can go through. So I'll just set that rotation on the Z scale to -90. So we'll go back to our timeline of door opening, shift left click and go to 1, and the value will be -90. So I'll hit compile and save. And now in the event graph, we'll see that new track 0, which means -90. I can also change that up here just by right clicking and clicking rename. So I'll do door rotation. And now if I go back to the event graph, you'll see it says door rotation and it's updated. So now I just want to grab that door back out, drag it in, and look for a set relative location and rotation. And for the update, I'm just going to update it to this. I'm going to right click and split the struct pin of this new rotation node only and set the door rotation to the Z, because the Z is what's going to be -90. And the timeline will ensure that it takes 1 second to open. So now when my character goes up to this door and hits E, you'll see that the door shifted to the middle and then opened. So we're going to fix that. So in order to fix that issue we were having, I set relative location and rotation, where we just need to set the relative rotation only, because the default value is 000 still means that it's going to set it to 000. So now I'm just going to split the struct again and just connect this door rotation to the Z, hit compile and save, go back to my map. And now when I hit play and open the door, you'll see that it doesn't jitter or shift out of space, and it works just fine. So now that we've covered the basics of the tutorial, I'm going to go over to my input action and go over some of these values and what they mean. So triggered refers to the moment when an action input is activated, and the event is fired whenever the input action condition for the action is met. So for example, if an action is bound to pressing the key, then the event will be triggered. And the time when it will ensure that it takes 1 second to open. So now when my character goes up to this door and hits E, you'll see that the door shifted to the middle and then opened. So we're going to fix that. So in order to fix that issue we were having, I set relative location and rotation, It'll trigger every time the key is pressed. Started marks the beginning of an input action, and this event is fired when the input action starts, such as when the key is first pressed down. So for this, I could just do started, and that would work as well. Ongoing refers to the continuous state of the input action, and this is relevant for actions that have a sustained input, kind of like holding down something. So if you want to hold down the jump button to go upwards, if you were a flying character, or something like you have to hold down something to grab onto something, and so on. Canceled happens when an input action is interrupted or stopped before it can be completed, and this would happen if an input takes precedence or if the conditions for the action to complete aren't met. And completed just goes over that it's the state when an action input finishes successfully. So for example, this could mean a key was pressed and released, or a certain gesture was performed in full. Now this action value, this will change depending on the type of input action that you have. So if I go over to my inputs and open up this IA interact, you'll see that our value type is digital bool. So this action value specifically is just a boolean as stated here. So this will indicate a true or false. Where if I were to go into Access 3D and hit save, now when I go back, you'll see that it changes to a vector, just like that. And you can basically see the functions right next to it. So your action value will be either a bool, float, vector 2D, or just a regular vector. So I'll change it back to bool. And it can include information such as the pressure of a button for analog inputs, or the position of joysticks, and so on. Now we also have elapsed seconds, which refers to the amount of time that has passed since the input action has started, and this can be useful for actions depending on timing, like charging an attack or holding down a button. Triggered seconds is at the time of which the input was last triggered, so this means that it determines how long it's been since the action was last activated. And input action, and this is just the object reference to the input action that caused the event to fire. Thanks for watching Code with Ro. Like, subscribe, comment below what you want to see next, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.